In a dimly lit room, Daniel Miller sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on a letter trembling in his hands. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a clock on the wall, each second amplifying the tension. The letter had been delivered anonymously, the handwriting on the envelope familiar yet unsettling. As Daniel opened it, a chill ran down his spine. The words inside were cryptic but pointed to a secret, something buried deep in the past that was now clawing its way back into the present. He had always known that his rise to wealth and success was built on a fragile foundation, but this was something else entirely. The letter suggested that the truth about his family was not as simple as he had believed, that the mother he had idolized might have hidden more than just her sorrow. The final line of the letter was burned into his mind: "Everything you thought you knew will be turned upside down when the truth is revealed." Daniel's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching his office. He quickly folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer just as Lucas entered the room. The boy's innocent smile was a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Daniel's mind. He knew then that he would have to uncover this secret, whatever it was, before it could destroy the life he had worked so hard to build. Daniel stood in his lavish penthouse, gazing out at the city's skyline. The view was breathtaking, skyscrapers piercing the sky, bustling streets far below, a testament to the life he had built from nothing. Yet, despite the wealth and success he had accumulated over the years, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that gnawed at him, a hollowness that no amount of money could fill. His mind often drifted back to his childhood, to the tiny, cold apartment where he had grown up, and the long, lonely nights when hunger and fear were his only companions. He had been just 7 years old when his father walked out, leaving him and his mother to fend for themselves. His mother, once a vibrant woman full of life, had withered under the weight of poverty and despair. Daniel had learned to survive on scraps, both of food and of affection. He often found himself wandering the streets, searching for warmth in a world that seemed determined to freeze him out. The memory of those days still haunted him, a ghost that lingered in the shadows of his mind, no matter how far he tried to run. It was this ghost that pushed him to succeed, that fueled his relentless drive to rise above his circumstances. But now, standing in the midst of everything he had ever wanted, Daniel wondered if he had truly escaped. The past had a way of clinging to him, whispering in his ear when the nights were quiet and the distractions of wealth and power faded away. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Something had to change. That change began when Daniel received an invitation to visit a local orphanage. The holiday season was approaching, and the director had reached out to wealthy benefactors, hoping to secure donations and gifts for the children. At first, Daniel had hesitated. What could he, a man who had left his past behind, possibly offer to these children? But something inside him stirred, a sense of obligation, perhaps, or the faint hope that by helping them, he might find a way to help himself. And so, with a mixture of reluctance and curiosity, Daniel accepted the invitation. He would go to the orphanage, distribute gifts, and perhaps, in doing so, finally make peace with the boy he used to be. The orphanage was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the glitz and glamour of the city. As Daniel's car pulled up to the modest brick building, he felt a pang of anxiety. This place, with its worn facade and faded playground, reminded him too much of the world he had tried to leave behind. But there was no turning back now. He stepped out of the car, carrying bags of toys and winter clothes, and made his way to the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the cold exterior. Children's laughter echoed through the hallways, and the walls were adorned with colorful drawings and holiday decorations. The staff greeted Daniel warmly, their gratitude evident in their eyes. Yet, despite the cheerful surroundings, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over him. He felt like an intruder in a world that was both foreign and painfully familiar. As he began handing out the gifts, Daniel forced himself to smile, to engage with the children who eagerly accepted the presents. But beneath the surface, his mind was elsewhere. He was lost in a fog of memories, each child's face reminding him of a different part of his past. The orphanage director, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed his distraction. She gently touched his arm and led him to a quieter corner of the room. Sometimes, she said softly, giving is a way to heal our own wounds. Her words struck a chord in Daniel. He looked around at the children, their bright eyes filled with hope despite the challenges they faced. Perhaps this was why he had come here, not just to give gifts, but to find something he had lost long ago. As Daniel continued to distribute gifts, he felt a strange sense of familiarity tugging at him. It was as if the walls of the orphanage held echoes of his past, and each step he took brought him closer to something he couldn't quite identify. Then, as he turned to hand out another toy, his eyes locked onto a boy standing in the corner of the room, half hidden behind a bookshelf. The boy, who looked to be about 8 years old, was quiet, unlike the other children who were eagerly tearing into their presents. There was something about him, his posture, his eyes, that reminded Daniel of himself at that age. The boy's eyes were wide and observant, taking in everything around him, yet there was a guardedness in his expression, a wariness that spoke of a life too acquainted with disappointment. Daniel approached the boy slowly, kneeling down to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lucas," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at the toy in Daniel's hand but made no move to take it. Instead, he simply stared at Daniel, as if trying to figure him out. There was a moment of silence between them, one filled with unspoken understanding. Daniel saw in Lucas the same loneliness he had carried as a child, the same yearning for something more. It was unsettling, yet it also stirred something deep within him, a connection that defied explanation. Over the next hour, Daniel found himself gravitating toward Lucas, spending more time with him than with any of the other children. They talked about trivial things at first, school, favorite foods, the weather, but gradually, their conversation deepened. Lucas was hesitant to share too much, but Daniel could tell that the boy had seen more than his fair share of hardship. Lucas told him about the other kids at the orphanage, how they all came from different places but shared the same longing for a family. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Daniel could sense the vulnerability beneath his words. He could see it in the way Lucas avoided making eye contact, the way his hands fidgeted with the hem of his shirt whenever the conversation touched on personal topics. As they spoke, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this boy than met the eye. The way Lucas carried himself, the way he seemed so aware of the world around him, it reminded Daniel of himself. He saw in Lucas the same resilience, the same quiet determination to survive, no matter the odds. By the end of the visit, Daniel knew that his encounter with Lucas was no mere coincidence. There was a reason he had been drawn to this orphanage, to this boy. And whatever that reason was, he couldn't leave without finding out more. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts of Lucas, and with them came a flood of memories he had long tried to suppress. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as images from his childhood played out in his mind like a movie reel. He saw himself as a young boy, much like Lucas, wandering the streets of his neighborhood, searching for a place where he belonged. In his mind, Daniel revisited the moments that had shaped him, the nights when his mother cried herself to sleep, the days when he went without food, the moments when he felt invisible to the world around him. He remembered the ache of loneliness, the desperation to be seen, to be loved. And now, all of those feelings were resurfacing, triggered by the sight of a boy who reminded him so much of himself. As the memories continued to haunt him, Daniel began to realize that his encounter with Lucas had opened old wounds he thought had healed. But instead of running from the pain, he found himself wanting to confront it, to understand it. He needed to know why this boy had affected him so deeply, and why he felt such a strong connection to him. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He would return to the orphanage, not just to see Lucas again, but to search for answers. He had to know more about this boy who had stirred up so much within him, and who seemed to hold the key to unlocking the parts of his past that still haunted him. Daniel arrived at the orphanage earlier than expected, carrying a sense of urgency that he couldn't explain. He was greeted by the same warm smiles and grateful expressions, but his focus was singular. He needed to find Lucas, and he needed to learn more about him. The staff, seeing his determination, offered to help. They provided him with what little information they had on Lucas, his date of birth, the circumstances under which he was found, and the fact that he had been in the orphanage since he was 3 years old. But the more Daniel learned, the more questions he had. Why did Lucas look so much like him? Why did his presence stir memories that Daniel had long buried? Determined to find answers, Daniel began to investigate further. He contacted local records offices, spoke with social workers, and even hired a private investigator to dig into Lucas's past. He needed to know where this boy came from, and if there was a connection between them that went beyond coincidence. As the days passed, Daniel's obsession with finding the truth grew stronger. He spent hours poring over documents, searching for clues, trying to piece together the puzzle of Lucas's life. But the more he uncovered, the more complex the story became. Every lead seemed to point him in a different direction, and every answer only raised more questions. After weeks of searching, Daniel finally stumbled upon a piece of information that left him stunned. Lucas had been born in the same small town where Daniel had grown up, just a year after Daniel had left to pursue his fortune. The timelines matched up perfectly, and the circumstances surrounding Lucas's abandonment bore an eerie resemblance to Daniel's own childhood experiences. This revelation hit Daniel like a ton of bricks. Could it be possible that Lucas was connected to him in a way he had never imagined? Could this boy, who looked so much like him, actually be a part of his past? The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. He knew he needed to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. There was only one person who could provide the answers he sought, the orphanage director, who had been there when Lucas was first brought in. Daniel made up his mind to visit her, determined to uncover the full story, no matter what it might reveal. When Daniel arrived at the orphanage, he was met with the solemn gaze of the director. She seemed to sense the gravity of his visit and led him to her office, where she retrieved a small, worn box from a locked drawer. "These were found with Lucas," she said quietly, handing the box to Daniel. "I think you should see them." Daniel opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, he found a stack of old letters, yellowed with age. As he began to read, his breath caught in his throat. The letters were written in a familiar hand, the handwriting of his mother. They were addressed to him, letters she had written but never sent, filled with words of love, regret, and desperation. The letters told a story Daniel had never known. His mother had been forced to give up another child, a child she had kept hidden from him. She had done it out of fear and necessity, believing it was the only way to protect both of her sons. The realization hit Daniel like a tidal wave. Lucas was his brother, the brother he had never known existed. Tears filled Daniel's eyes as he continued to read. His mother's words revealed a side of her he had never seen, a woman who had been broken by life but had fought to protect her children in the only way she knew how. The letters were a lifeline, a connection to the past that Daniel had thought was lost forever. But as he read further, a chilling detail emerged. His mother hinted at someone who had threatened her, someone who had forced her hand in giving up Lucas. The letters mentioned a man, unnamed but described in ominous terms, who had claimed he could protect Lucas if she surrendered him. The identity of this man was unclear, but the implications were terrifying. Daniel realized that there was more to his mother's decision than he had ever imagined, and that the danger she had tried to shield them from might still be out there. The revelation that Lucas was his brother left Daniel reeling. How could he have gone all these years without knowing? The shock was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. He needed to protect Lucas, to ensure that he was safe and cared for. But there was still so much Daniel didn't know, and he needed answers. He returned to the orphanage the next day, determined to confront the director. He demanded to know why Lucas had never been told about his family, why the truth had been kept hidden for so long. The director, her voice filled with sorrow, explained that she had been waiting for the right person to come forward, someone who could provide Lucas with the love and stability he needed. Daniel felt a surge of anger, mixed with guilt. He had spent so many years building his empire, focusing on his own success, while his brother had been left to fend for himself in an orphanage. But there was no time for self-pity. He had a responsibility now, a duty to his brother. And he would do whatever it took to make things right. As Daniel left the orphanage, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from his private investigator, who had found something new, a lead on the identity of the mysterious man mentioned in his mother's letters. The message was brief, but it sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. The man was still alive, and he was much closer than Daniel could have imagined. Determined to give Lucas the life he deserved, Daniel immediately began the process of adopting him. But the road was far from smooth. As he filed the necessary paperwork and prepared for the adoption hearings, he quickly realized that the legal system was not as simple as he had hoped. Complications arose, particularly when other relatives, distant and disinterested, appeared out of nowhere to challenge his claim. These relatives, who had shown no interest in Lucas until now, were motivated by greed. They saw Lucas as a potential heir, a ticket to the wealth and influence that Daniel had accumulated. The legal battle that ensued was fierce and draining. Daniel found himself facing not just legal challenges but personal attacks on his character and fitness as a guardian. The fight for Lucas became more than just a battle for custody. It became a fight for justice, for the chance to give his brother the life he had been denied. Daniel poured his heart and soul into the case, refusing to back down, no matter how tough the opposition became. But just when Daniel thought he had the upper hand, a new complication arose. Thomas, the distant cousin who had challenged the adoption, began to play dirty. He dug into Daniel's past, trying to find any dirt he could use against him. And then, out of nowhere, Thomas presented a shocking piece of evidence, a document that suggested Lucas might not even be Daniel's brother. The most formidable opponent in the legal battle was Thomas, a distant cousin who had no real interest in Lucas's welfare. To Thomas, Lucas was nothing more than a pawn in a game of power and wealth. He hired top-tier lawyers, used his connections to sway opinions, and did everything in his power to undermine Daniel's efforts. Thomas presented himself as a more stable and experienced guardian, someone who could provide Lucas with a life of privilege. But beneath the surface, his intentions were clear. He wanted control over Lucas, and through him, a stake in the Miller fortune. The battle between Daniel and Thomas grew increasingly bitter, with each side pulling out all the stops. Then came the bombshell. Thomas claimed to have evidence that Lucas was not Daniel's brother, but the son of the mysterious man mentioned in the letters, a man who, according to Thomas, had ties to criminal organizations. The courtroom erupted in chaos as Thomas laid out his case, painting a picture of a dark and dangerous world that Daniel had never been a part of. Lucas, meanwhile, was caught in the middle, torn between two worlds. He admired Daniel and felt a deep connection with him, but he was also overwhelmed by the legal proceedings and the pressure to make a decision that would affect the rest of his life. As the court date approached, the tension mounted, and it became clear that the final outcome would not be determined by legal arguments alone but by the emotional bonds that had been forged. As the legal battle dragged on, the judge made a surprising decision: Lucas would have a say in where he wanted to go. It was an unusual move, but one that recognized the importance of the boy's own wishes in determining his future. Lucas was brought before the judge, who spoke to him with kindness and respect, explaining the gravity of the choice he had to make. Lucas was given time to think, to talk to both Daniel and Thomas, and to weigh his options. It was an incredibly difficult decision for a boy his age, and the weight of it showed in his every word and action. Daniel, for his part, tried to reassure Lucas, telling him that whatever choice he made, it would be okay. But inside, Daniel was terrified of losing the brother he had only just found. On the day of the decision, Lucas stood before the court, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at Daniel, then at Thomas, and then back at Daniel. There was silence in the courtroom as everyone waited for his response. Finally, in a voice that was both strong and trembling, Lucas spoke. "I want to be with Daniel," he said. "He's my brother." The final hearing was a moment of high drama, with emotions running high on all sides. Daniel's lawyer presented a compelling case, focusing on the bond that had formed between Daniel and Lucas, the evidence of their shared history, and the letters from Daniel's mother that had been found with Lucas. The court listened intently as Daniel himself took the stand, speaking from the heart about his desire to give Lucas the life he deserved. Thomas's lawyers countered with every argument they could muster, questioning Daniel's fitness as a guardian, pointing to his busy lifestyle, and suggesting that Lucas would be better off with someone who could provide him with more stability. But their arguments were cold and calculated, lacking the emotional weight that Daniel's case carried. As the hearing drew to a close, Thomas made one final move. He introduced a man who claimed to be Lucas's biological father. The man's appearance sent shockwaves through the courtroom. He had the same dark eyes as Lucas, and his demeanor was both calm and menacing. He testified that he had been searching for Lucas for years and that his connection to the boy was undeniable. The judge took time to deliberate, leaving everyone in suspense. When the decision was finally announced, the tension in the room was palpable. The judge ruled in favor of Daniel, citing the deep bond between him and Lucas and the clear evidence that they were meant to be together. But the judge also ordered a DNA test to be conducted, just to confirm Lucas's parentage. The court's decision was final: Lucas would stay with Daniel, as his brother and guardian. Life after the verdict was both exhilarating and daunting. Daniel and Lucas moved into Daniel's penthouse, a world away from the orphanage that had been Lucas's home for so many years. The adjustment was difficult for both of them. Lucas, who had grown accustomed to a life of scarcity and uncertainty, found it hard to adapt to the opulence and stability that Daniel's wealth provided. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled with the realities of being a full-time guardian, a role that required more patience and understanding than he had anticipated. But despite the challenges, there were moments of pure joy. Daniel and Lucas began to develop a routine, sharing meals, watching movies, and exploring the city together. They talked about everything: Lucas's hopes and fears, Daniel's childhood, their shared dreams for the future. Slowly but surely, they began to build a life together, one that was grounded in trust and love. Yet, for all the progress they made, there were still moments of tension, moments when the scars of their pasts threatened to pull them apart. Lucas had been through so much in his young life, and the pain of abandonment still lingered. He sometimes pushed Daniel away, testing the limits of their relationship, unsure if this newfound stability was real or just another illusion. Daniel, too, had his own doubts and insecurities, haunted by the fear that he would fail as a guardian, that he wasn't capable of being the father figure Lucas needed. Recognizing the challenges they faced, Daniel made the decision to seek help. He enrolled both himself and Lucas in therapy, hoping that with the guidance of a professional, they could work through the traumas of their pasts and learn to build a healthier, more secure relationship. The therapy sessions were intense, bringing to the surface emotions that both of them had buried for years. For Lucas, therapy became a safe space where he could express his fears and anxieties without judgment. He talked about the pain of losing his family, the loneliness of life in the orphanage, and the difficulty of trusting that Daniel would be there for him, no matter what. Through these sessions, Lucas began to understand that his fears were a natural response to the trauma he had endured, and that it was okay to feel vulnerable. For Daniel, therapy was a revelation. He had spent so many years running from his past, believing that success would erase the pain of his childhood. But now, faced with the responsibility of caring for Lucas, he realized that he could no longer ignore the wounds that still lingered. Therapy helped him to confront those wounds, to acknowledge the pain he had tried to bury, and to begin the process of healing. Just as they began to make progress, an unexpected setback occurred. Lucas started receiving anonymous messages, threatening notes that hinted at the identity of the mysterious man from the letters. The messages were unsettling, filled with cryptic warnings and references to Lucas's past. It became clear that someone was watching them, someone who wanted to keep the past hidden. One afternoon, just as Daniel and Lucas were beginning to find their rhythm, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find a woman standing on the threshold, her expression a mix of determination and hesitation. She introduced herself as Sarah, a social worker who had been involved in Daniel's case when he was a child. Sarah explained that she had been following Daniel's journey from a distance, and that she had come to share some information that she believed he needed to hear. She spoke of the time when Daniel's mother had been forced to make the impossible decision to give up one of her children, a decision that had haunted her for the rest of her life. But there was more to the story. Sarah had uncovered documents that suggested a deeper connection between Daniel and Lucas, one that went beyond mere coincidence. The documents revealed that Daniel's mother had not just given up Lucas to protect him, but had done so because she knew that one day, Daniel would come back for him. She had left clues, hidden messages in the letters she wrote, in the hope that Daniel would find his way to Lucas when the time was right. The realization was overwhelming for Daniel. His mother had always intended for him to find his brother, to reunite the family that had been torn apart. But Sarah also brought a warning. The man who had threatened Daniel's mother was still alive, and he had been watching Lucas ever since he was brought to the orphanage. Sarah urged Daniel to be careful, to protect Lucas at all costs. The danger was real, and the consequences of ignoring it could be dire. The information Sarah shared brought a new perspective to Daniel and Lucas's relationship. It was no longer just about a chance meeting or a legal battle. It was about destiny, about a bond that had been forged long before either of them knew it existed. Daniel realized that his mother's actions, though painful, had been driven by a deep love for both of her sons. She had done what she believed was necessary to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. As Daniel processed this new understanding, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The anger and resentment he had harbored toward his mother began to fade, replaced by a deep gratitude for the sacrifices she had made. He shared the information with Lucas, who was both shocked and relieved to learn that his past had been shaped by love, not abandonment. The revelation brought Daniel and Lucas closer together, strengthening their bond in ways they hadn't anticipated. They began to see each other not just as brothers, but as two people who had been given a second chance at family, a chance that had been orchestrated by the very person who had brought them into the world. But the peace was short-lived. The threatening messages continued, becoming more frequent and more sinister. It was clear that someone was determined to keep the past buried, no matter the cost. Daniel knew that he had to take action before the situation escalated further. Despite the newfound closeness between them, Daniel was faced with a difficult decision, whether to tell Lucas everything he had learned about their past. The information Sarah had shared was powerful, but it was also overwhelming, and Daniel feared that burdening Lucas with the full truth could do more harm than good. Daniel wrestled with the decision, consulting with Sarah and the therapist who had been working with them. They advised him to be honest with Lucas, but to do so in a way that would allow the boy to process the information at his own pace. They emphasized the importance of trust in their relationship and how keeping secrets, even with the best of intentions, could undermine that trust. In the end, Daniel decided to write a letter to Lucas, explaining everything he had learned. He poured his heart into the words, hoping that one day, when Lucas was ready, he would be able to read the letter and understand why things had happened the way they did. For now, though, Daniel kept the letter hidden, waiting for the right moment to share it. But the threats were becoming more than just words. One day, Daniel returned home to find the house ransacked, the letter to Lucas missing. Panic set in as he realized that the man from his mother's past had found them and was closing in. The time for secrets was over. Daniel had to protect Lucas, and that meant revealing the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a comfortable routine. Daniel and Lucas continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. But the letter weighed heavily on Daniel's mind, a constant reminder of the secret he was keeping. He knew that eventually, he would have to share it with Lucas, but he wanted to wait until the time was right. One evening, as Daniel was going through some papers in his study, Lucas walked in. The boy was curious about what Daniel was working on and began to poke around the room. In his exploration, Lucas stumbled upon the letter. He picked it up, his eyes widening as he realized what it was. "What's this?" he asked, holding the envelope up to Daniel. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected Lucas to find the letter so soon, and he wasn't sure how to handle the situation. But there was no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, Daniel sat down with Lucas and explained that the letter contained some important information about their past, information that he hadn't yet shared because he wanted to make sure Lucas was ready to hear it. Lucas looked at Daniel, then at the letter. After a moment of hesitation, he handed it back to Daniel. "I trust you," he said quietly. "Whenever you think I'm ready, I'll be here." But before Daniel could respond, the front door burst open, and two men stormed into the house. They were armed and demanded that Daniel hand over Lucas. The men were sent by the mysterious figure from his mother's past, and they were there to take Lucas away, to a place where the truth would never be revealed. Daniel was both relieved and moved by Lucas's response. The boy's trust meant everything to him, and he was determined not to betray it. But the encounter with the letter also made Daniel realize that he couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. The time would come when Lucas needed to know everything, and when that time came, Daniel wanted to be ready. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to prepare for that moment. He spent more time talking with Lucas, sharing stories from his own childhood, and encouraging Lucas to open up about his own experiences. They grew closer with each conversation, learning to trust each other in ways they hadn't before. Finally, one evening, as they sat together on the couch, Daniel decided that the time had come. He retrieved the letter from his study and handed it to Lucas. "I think you're ready," he said softly. "This letter, it's about us, about our family. I want you to know everything." Lucas took the letter with trembling hands. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the envelope and began to read. As he did, Daniel watched him closely, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was a turning point in their relationship, one that would either bring them closer together or tear them apart. But just as Lucas finished reading, the phone rang. It was Sarah, calling to warn Daniel that the man from his mother's past had been spotted near their house. The danger was closer than ever, and they needed to act fast. As Lucas read the letter, his expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to understanding. He looked up at Daniel, tears in his eyes, but there was no anger, no resentment, only a deep sense of connection. The truth, painful as it was, had given him a new perspective on his life, on his brother, and on the family they had both lost and found. "I had no idea," Lucas whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "But now, I understand. I understand why you did what you did, why Mom did what she did. It all makes sense now." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. The moment he had feared for so long had finally arrived, and it had gone better than he could have ever hoped. He reached out and pulled Lucas into a tight embrace, holding him close as they both let the emotions of the moment wash over them. From that day forward, their bond grew stronger. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and fear, but they faced them together as a family. The trust they had built, the love they had shared, was unbreakable, and it gave them the strength to face whatever the future might hold. But they couldn't ignore the danger that still loomed over them. The man who had threatened their mother was closing in, and Daniel knew that they had to confront him before it was too late. Just as Daniel and Lucas were beginning to find their footing as a family, they received news that threatened to upend everything. The orphanage where Lucas had lived for so many years was closing down. Financial difficulties and dwindling support had forced the directors to make the difficult decision to shut its doors. Many of the children who lived there had nowhere to go, and the prospect of them being scattered across different institutions was a grim reality. The news hit Lucas hard. He had many friends at the orphanage, children who had become like family to him. The thought of them being separated, of losing the only home they had ever known, was devastating. Daniel, too, was deeply affected by the news. He knew all too well what it was like to feel abandoned, to have nowhere to turn, and he couldn't stand the thought of these children going through the same experience. Determined to do something, Daniel sprang into action. He contacted the directors of the orphanage, offering his financial support to keep the institution running. But it quickly became clear that money alone wouldn't be enough. The orphanage needed more than just funds. It needed a new vision, a new approach to caring for the children who lived there. As they worked to save the orphanage, Daniel and Lucas began receiving more threats. The man from their past was determined to keep them from succeeding, and he was willing to do whatever it took to stop them. Realizing that he needed to do more, Daniel decided to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting orphans and foster children. The foundation would provide not only financial support but also educational opportunities, counseling services, and mentorship programs. Daniel's goal was to create a network of care that would ensure no child was left behind, no matter their circumstances. Lucas played a key role in the foundation's creation. His insights, drawn from his own experiences at the orphanage, were invaluable in shaping the foundation's mission and programs. He spoke at meetings, sharing his story and advocating for the children who still lived at the orphanage. His passion and determination inspired everyone involved, and the foundation quickly gained traction. Within months, the foundation had secured the funds needed to keep the orphanage open, and plans were in place to expand its services to other institutions across the city. Daniel and Lucas worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts and souls into the project. It was more than just a charity for them, it was a way to give back, to make a difference in the lives of children who, like Lucas, had once felt lost and alone. But the threats persisted, and Daniel knew that their work was far from over. The man who had haunted their past was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. The foundation's first success story came in the form of a young girl named Emma. Emma had been living at the orphanage for several years, a quiet and shy child who rarely spoke to anyone. But Lucas saw something in her that others didn't, a spark of resilience, a quiet strength that reminded him of himself. With Lucas's encouragement, Emma began to come out of her shell. She participated in the foundation's programs, excelling in her studies and gaining confidence with each passing day. When a couple came forward, expressing interest in adopting a child, Lucas and Daniel knew that Emma was the perfect fit. The adoption process was smooth, thanks in large part to the support provided by the foundation. Emma found a loving home with parents who adored her, and she blossomed in her new environment. For Lucas, seeing Emma's transformation was a deeply rewarding experience. It reinforced his belief in the work they were doing and gave him a renewed sense of purpose. But the success was overshadowed by a new development. The man who had been threatening them had finally made his move. He had found Emma's new family and was using them as leverage to get to Lucas. On the first anniversary of Lucas's adoption, Daniel organized a special event, a reunion for all the children who had benefited from the foundation's work. The event was held at the orphanage, which had been renovated and transformed into a vibrant, welcoming space for children to thrive. The reunion was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches. Children who had once been lost and forgotten now had bright futures ahead of them, thanks to the efforts of the foundation. Lucas, now a young man, stood at the center of it all, proud of the work he had done and the lives he had helped change. As Daniel watched Lucas interact with the children and their families, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The reunion was more than just a celebration of the foundation's success. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and second chances. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the past might be, the future always held the possibility of light. But the reunion was also a turning point. The man who had been stalking them finally revealed himself, and the confrontation that followed would change their lives forever. As the reunion came to a close, Lucas found himself reflecting on the journey he had been on. He thought about the boy he had been when Daniel first walked into the orphanage, the boy who had been afraid to hope, to dream. And he thought about the man he had become, thanks to the love and support of his brother. One evening, as Lucas was going through some old boxes in Daniel's study, he came across the letter Daniel had written to him years earlier, the letter that had explained everything about their past, their connection, and the sacrifices their mother had made. Lucas had read the letter once before, but now, as a young man, he read it with a new perspective. The words in the letter resonated with him on a deeper level, revealing truths he hadn't fully understood before. He realized just how much Daniel had done for him, how much he had sacrificed to give him a better life. The letter was a final piece of the puzzle, a testament to the bond they shared and the journey they had taken together. But there was one final revelation in the letter, something Daniel had not shared with Lucas until now, the true identity of the man who had threatened their mother. The man was someone they had known all along, someone who had been a part of their lives for years, hiding in plain sight. With the foundation thriving and their bond stronger than ever, Daniel began to think about the legacy he wanted to leave behind. He had achieved more than he had ever dreamed of: wealth, success, and a loving family. But now, as he looked to the future, he realized that his greatest legacy would not be the businesses he had built or the fortune he had amassed, but the lives he had touched. Daniel saw in Lucas the embodiment of that legacy, a young man who had overcome incredible odds to become a compassionate, strong, and determined individual. He knew that Lucas would continue the work they had started together, ensuring that the foundation would thrive for years to come. As Daniel reflected on his life, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced his past, healed the wounds that had once haunted him, and found a way to turn his pain into something beautiful. He had given Lucas the life he deserved, and in doing so, had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that he had never known before. But the peace was fragile. The final confrontation with the man who had haunted their past was looming, and Daniel knew that it would either secure their future or shatter everything they had built. On a quiet evening, as they sat together on the hill overlooking the orphanage, Daniel and Lucas made a promise to each other. They promised to continue fighting for the children who still needed help, to never stop working to make the world a better place. It was a promise that came from the heart, one that would guide them in the years to come. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that together, they could face anything. The promise they made was not just to each other, but to the children they had helped, and to the memory of the family they had lost and found again. As they made their promise, the man who had haunted their past watched from the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. The story ended as it began, with Daniel and Lucas standing side by side. But this time, they were not looking out at the city from a penthouse, they were standing on the hill overlooking the new orphanage they had built together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and the sounds of children's laughter filled the air. As they watched the children play, Daniel and Lucas knew that their journey had just begun. They had come so far, but there was still so much more to do, so many more lives to touch. And as long as they had each other, they knew that they could face whatever the future held. But as they turned to leave, the man who had haunted their past finally revealed himself. The confrontation was brutal, and it tested everything they had learned about love, trust, and resilience. In the end, it was the strength of their bond that saved them, a bond forged in the fires of their shared past and the hope for a brighter future.